Hey folks, welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is Will Carey, your host. I appreciate you listening. When I'm recording this, it's a couple of days after I performed my one-man show, Laughing Through the Sad, for the Tank Solo Week Festival. If you were there, thank you for being there. It's coming along. I think last Friday was probably my best performance of that show. And to be able to know that I can consistently do an hour of really solid and heartfelt and still be funny stories and jokes is a big confidence boost. And I look forward to the next place I'm going to do it. I am going to be in the process of trying to book it for February and March in New York City. But if you have a venue and would like me to come and do my show at it, I will, of course, be more than open to that. If you could feel free to contact me through my website, willcareyisfunny.com, or you can send me a message on Twitter at @comicwillcarey, and I will have samples from the show online that I can send to you. Today on the show, I have comedian, writer, and improviser Chris Migliaccio. Chris is a guy I met at the People's Improv Theater in New York City. One of my gigs is I do lights and sound at the Pit for sketch and improv shows, and I happened to be doing a show at the Pit, and I met Chris and Mike Bryan, his co-producer, for a sketch show they do called Backdoor Barbecue. I'm actually gonna do a show when I'm recording this. I'll be doing one more show that I'll be teching for them. And I wanted to have Chris on the podcast, and we had a really wide-ranging and eye-opening conversation. We talk politics, because as part of the continuing reaction from the 2016 election, that is still an ever-present conversation and that I'm continuing to have with new people. And we talk improv, and we go to some really interesting and unique places. And I don't want to ruin too much of it up top, but I would say this is a really fun one to listen to, folks. So let's get right into it. And thank you for listening. And let's go to my chat with Chris.
You're not Republicans. Like from by the time I was in college or so, which is now about 15 years ago, I was sort of come to an awareness of like, wait a minute, like my values and what I believe in and the Republican Party's values don't really line up, at least on a national level. Like I've always liked Mike Bloomberg kind of. And then but my parents are always like, no, like I don't. And then even the arguments are always just weird because I'd always just be like, well, you guys believe in this, and you guys believe in that, and they were like, yeah, but. And somehow I could never convince them. And then finally this year I was talking to my mom in like March or April before the New York primary. And she was like, well, we can't vote for Trump. He's terrible. And I'm like, okay. But even then she was like, well, Ted, I don't know what I'm going to do because Ted Cruz is terrible too. And even that John Kasich guy seems sort of reasonable, but he hates women. So I was like, yeah, Mom, yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem with the Republican Party at whole is there's this past election, and this is the tone of every interview I've done so far is just a real quick, where's everybody at kind of vibe to it. But this past and I followed it a lot more closely than I have previous elections or longer. This one kind of had there was no one running that I thought, okay, I would be all right if they won. I didn't have that feeling for too many even back in the old days when it looked like the band Slipknot was on stage. There was just so many people at one point.
Yeah, because I'm like trying to run through those names, and they're all pretty terrible. And I think the problem is that the 8 years of obstructing Obama has sort of really stripped out any sort of interesting principles from the Republican Party for the most part. And you're really just left with the people who are just kind of nakedly desperate to win.
Right.
And it's just, I don't know, there's just not a lot of those. I mean, there were some people that spoke out against Trump that seemed reasonable, but again, just on a national level, like there's just not a lot of them anymore.
Right. And now everyone's, and now since he's won, everybody's like angling. They're in full on like political maneuvering mode is what it seems like. And the number of stuff that sounds bad to a lot of people and terrifying to a lot of people, there's just so much of it, you can't keep up with it anymore. Which some news outlets say that that's like part of his strategy.
Oh, probably. And you can't even, it's weird, like having been like writing jokes about this stuff, like you can't even kind of write the jokes fast enough before there's a new scandal that is the top of the headlines.
Yeah, he's post-topical. He's like the common phrase, like people say too soon when it comes to jokes. There's not soon enough now. There's like future soon.
Yeah, you need to write the jokes and like say them like literally as soon as the thing happens. Like I wrote a lot of things about Steve Bannon when that happened, and they already seem, that's a week ago, and they seem stale, these jokes, which are, again, literally from a week ago about something that you'd think is a big deal. It just seems really, it's just strange how fast that's happening.
Exactly. I'm curious because, and I'll tell you where I was the night of the election. You were in, I'm curious, you were in Italy when you found the results. Was there any, like, what part of Italy were you in?
I was in northern Italy. To be specific, I was outside a town called Novi Ligure, which is where my great-grandmother is from. My great-grandmother grew up on farms in Italy, and great-grandmother grew up on farms in Italy, and immigrated to the U.S. with her husband in about 100 years ago now. And so part of the idea of this trip, other than seeing some northern Italian cities that seemed cool and staying at some vineyards, which seemed like just kind of wonderful places to hang out, was sort of seeing that. And so we were literally staying in this small apartment on this like kind of tiny vineyard that we picked. I didn't even think we knew it was as an operating vineyard. Just my wife was looking for Airbnb places that were near where my great-grandmother grew up, just because we wanted to be in that sort of place, just to sort of feel that.
Yeah.
And so we were literally in this small apartment, and it had been like a really interesting trip because of that connection and thinking about just sort of the impact that had.
Right. Kind of getting close to like your own family history.
Yeah, because I knew about that history, and I spent a lot of time with my great-grandmother when I was growing up, because she watched me like after school a lot until I was probably like 7 or 8. And it was I was thinking a lot about how the decision that she made to come to the U.S. is just such a super large decision. And then, like, you amplify that. Like, I think I always knew that intellectually, but then you get out there and you see these sort of like rolling fields where there's nothing you can see other than other farms. And then to process the idea is like, okay, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go halfway across the world where I don't know the language, and I'm going to live in a large, very dense city.
Right.
And try to make my way there. It's a bigger decision than I will ever make in my life. For all of the like difficult and hard decisions I've ever made that have changed the direction of my life, nothing will ever match that.
Right.
Not close. And so that was sort of really affecting me, and sort of the way that, you know, I am who I am in large part because of that choice. Because who knows what I would be as a person had I grown up in Italy, or if it had been my grandmother that had come over. Who knows? I mean, there's just the counterfactuals start running pretty wild at that point.
Yeah, you start playing out your like Rick and Morty alternate timeline kind of thing, and you're like, oh, in another life, I make cheese.
Yeah, well, it's weird enough that I think my parents, when I was like 9 or 10, like seriously considered moving to like North Carolina or Florida. And I even think that like I'd be a totally different person if that happened. I'd drive for one. So.
Right. No, exactly. Like I think about if I had picked up on the fact that the girl that had a crush on me in high school did, and I reciprocated that, I could probably still be living there, have an entirely different life. It's really crazy to kind of, when you sit and think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the decisions you make. I mean, particularly, I always find with relationships, those doors where you didn't kind of understand what you were doing, but you look back and you were like, if you'd just been more accepting of something or less or whatever it is, like it's like you could have been married like a bunch of times maybe. Like if you that girl in high school, right? That could have been for you. Like you could have just been like, well, she's pretty great.
Yeah.
And you might have just been like, okay, and that would have been maybe fine. And that's, I think, the difficult thing about it, right? Is that sometimes you're like, this could have been okay. This could have been kind of cool.
Yeah.
Or maybe it would have been not that great, or maybe it would have been really terrible, but maybe that being terrible would have led you, like, you just go down these rabbit holes.
There's like an altered timeline where I'm like a men's rights activist, and I'm like real on Reddit all the time. So
those guys kind of freak me out.
Yeah. So I'm
in Italy, right? And
is there a reaction to Trump's election in Italy? Like, are people aware of it and reacting to it?
They're totally aware of it. I always thought that when people talked about people in the rest of the world laughing at us, that it was a euphemism, but they are actually, like, people laughed in my face at the thought of Donald Trump being the president of anything. In part, in Italy, it's very, they have a very specific reaction to it because they lived through this guy, Silvio Berlusconi, who was prime minister for kind of like 18 years on and off. Like, I think it was like 12 years total, but with the weird like parliamentary system, he was prime minister for like 2 years and then 5 and then like 3 more or something. But they're all like, well, how are you guys elected? You guys are supposed to be better than this. How are you guys electing Berlusconi, who, for those who are not aware, was basically like this like media mogul who portrayed himself as an outsider and then proceeded to use his time as prime minister to prevent himself from getting sent to jail and very much enrich himself and his friends. He was finally taken down by a prostitution scandal. I highly recommend Googling the term bunga bunga, but not when at work or when like your family's around or just when any people are around, because it's like you'll go into some weird places.
Right.
But it's hilarious, and these stories of his sexual escapades are intense. Including the one I will point out is there's one story about a stripper giving him a lap dance while wearing a Barack Obama mask. Which,
oh my gosh, that's the kind of stuff that I am in the conspiracy theory part of my brain when I think about these like Bill Burr mentions these like eyes wide shut kind of parties where everyone's like wears like a goat mask and fucks each other. That's the reality of that. Like I imagine that.
I think the reality of
Trump's probably going to have Melania wear an Obama mask.
Well, that's true, but I would imagine
if he hasn't already.
I would imagine the reality of those parties is mostly that episode of Party Down where the guy is trying to have the orgy and everyone's just having wine and cheese.
I remember that one. That was a good show. So
I just rewatched it because my wife hadn't seen it, and I forget why, but we had nothing else to take. I was like, just watch like the first episode, and she blew through it in like 3 days. Yeah,
it was a great show. So, okay, so you were in Italy when the election happened. Where I was actually same place we met because we've met a couple weeks ago. And forgive me, how do you pronounce your last name?
Migliaccio.
Migliaccio.
It's it's all the Italian grammar rules mashed into one long 10-letter last name.
Excellent. Fantastic. Chris Migliaccio. All right, I got that now. So I was actually behind the booth at the Pit, the People's Improv Theater, doing helping tech in a show on one screen, and then looking at election results on the other screen. And as soon as I saw Florida went, even though it wasn't official, that's when I like accepted in my heart that the way it was going. And there was like a big election party upstairs. And by the time the show was over, I went back up, and it was quiet. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
so quiet because like I feel like maybe there's probably like a comedy club, like a stand-up comedy club somewhere where there's a bunch of comedians going, well, I knew it. But the improv community, I feel that there's a real more earnest disappointment that happened at the Pit, maybe compared to other places.
Yeah, well, and I mean, also, there's a lot of good evidence to suggest that probably wouldn't happen. And so I think that's what made it so stunning. Because I woke up, so Italy's 6 hours ahead. I woke up at 3:30 in the morning, which was 9:30 Eastern time, just to like see what was happening, but assuming that like it was going to be relatively positive and I was just going to check in and go back to sleep.
Yeah.
And I ended up spending like the next like 3-4 hours because my wife was sleeping and I didn't want to wake her up. Because who wants to be the bearer of that bad news, like wake someone from a slumber?
Right.
So I literally was watching Keep It at 1600 live feed from a bathroom floor, like just back up against the door. And it was and you could watch them like slowly get less and less confident and more terrified as the night went on. And I was like, that's not good. That's
No, not at all. It's like the same feeling like that Chappelle sketch they did on SNL right after at the election party, where you could just see everyone slowly go from like, oh, my friend at Slate says she's going to win by 3 points to, I think America's racist.
yeah.
So that's the kind of comedy I really like, where it's like so brutally true and hilarious, but it kind of hurts also.
Yeah, I mean, in that particular comedy about this is going to be really painful, and it's going to have to be, I think, because I was writing. So I went and I like got on a plane like I don't know 8 hours later or something. I totally lost track because I never slept, and so I was just up. Trump's election still seems to me like kind of a haze about it. But I was sitting there on the plane trying to write jokes about it, and some of them are kind of okay and funny, but a lot of it's just sort of, I think, checking how the content of the joke.
Yeah.
Because if there's anything that comedians can do, I think is to not make the easy jokes that are kind of contentless, to really kind of like keep on the jokes that hammer at how terrible this guy is and the terrible decisions he's going to make.
Right.
To be the not Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, to kind of be, because there are people that can do, I think, just pure entertainment, and then but you need people that are gonna like, kind of grab you by the shirt and shake you. I can't do really insightful political very well. I do kind of absurdist social commentary on occasion at times, but as far as like slinging arrows and hitting the jugular of authority, I need to improve my aim.
I can't write sketches from that perspective. Like I write sketches from something true that happened, sort of like an interaction that maybe I'm sort of heightening a little bit, but it's all generally like really true.
Yeah.
So I don't tend to write, and my writing partner does, which is I always find interesting. He tends to write sketches from an idea that he then translates into characters and people.
Sure.
But I can't write like a political sketch just sort of off the top of my head. I can write jokes and I can write kind of monologue-y sort of things about politics, but like writing just a sketch just from a thing about Donald Trump just doesn't come out of me very easily.
Right. Now I kind of want to trace your origins here, because you're one of the first like sketch improv people that I've had on. So it's a world I'm not that familiar with. So I want to learn more about it. So you're Italian. Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Italy or the States?
Oh, I grew up in Queens, in Flushing.
In Flushing.
Yeah.
Nice. I like Flushing a lot. There's a lot of really good food in Flushing.
Yeah, really, really terrific food. It was an interesting neighborhood to grow up in because it was a very diverse community by that point. So
what year was this?
I'm 33. So basically I'm growing up in like the late 80s, early 90s. When I say about like, my like elementary school days or
Sure. No, I'm so curious what the like vibe of the neighborhood was. So it's a diverse community.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I grew up the schools are pretty good. So I grew up around a lot of like pretty smart kids of like various backgrounds.
Yeah.
Like I'm ticking off like my best friends when I was, 9 or 10 years old, and they were Jewish, they were Indian, they were Korean, Puerto Rican, just a giant kind of broad mix of people who all had kind of that same perspective. We all had parents who were like a little bit different, but everyone was still like, you're going to do well in school. Like we were all kind of like maybe the perfect sort of place to realize like, we're all a little bit different, but we're all the same,
Exactly. That's good. Okay. And what was and you said you grew up with your grandmother. What was your family like? What'd your folks do?
My parents are both teachers.
My mom's a teacher.
Yeah. My mom is taught elementary school, but she was also worked for the Board of Education for a long time, like running like special ed programs.
Yeah.
And my dad, he teaches elementary school as well, but for a long time, and he went back teaching elementary school at some point, but for a long time he was primarily a ballroom dance instructor, which comes from his dad was also a very talented ballroom dance instructor. Both of them were named best in the city at various points by publications. I don't know. I don't remember who, but which is interesting. I mean, that's an interesting thing because it was kind of funny because it was very much not a cool thing when I was like 11 or 12 to be like, yeah, my dad's a ballroom dance teacher. And then you get to like high school and college and you're like, yeah, I can ballroom dance. And girls are like, oh, that's cool. And you're like, I didn't have that kind of flipped. Like it very organically flipped.
Yeah, it's good when that flip happens. Be like, so everyone who made fun of me is hopefully flipping the other way. That's where I was at. So did you grow up ballroom dancing?
I didn't do it until I was in high school or so. And I didn't. My sister was actually a very good dancer. She did like tap and jazz and ballroom and stuff. But I ended up taking some classes at the school that she was at. So it's the one time there's some video somewhere of my sister and I performing on the same stage, not in the same number, but like she does like a modern dance number, and then there's me doing ballroom dance like 3 things later. Which is actually funny because I used to for money. So they always needed someone to bounce the door at these dance recitals of the parents. Like they'd basically like, you have to drop your kid off, and they would go downstairs and like get ready.
Sure.
And for like $50 or something for like a few hours, I would like bounce the door for them because they're just like, Chris is got to be here anyway because his sister's here. You know. Those people are crazy. I dealt with a lot of crazy parents because I did that, and I also was a umpire for Little League baseball.
Oh, really?
Which you'll see the absolute worst.
Oh my gosh, yes. Like when I was playing soccer and basketball in like elementary school for soccer, and in high school, middle school for basketball. Yeah, I saw some parents really have got to redirect how they express themselves because I don't get it. I don't get how someone could get that mad over a call related to their kid in a game.
A guy once ran on the field and started yelling at me, and luckily the president of the league was like coaching third base, and that guy like never showed up to a game. But he literally ran on the field during a game to yell at me because he felt I'd missed like a call on a third base or something. And I was like, dude, man, this is a Little League baseball game. Like your kid is not going to remember this. And
yeah. They're probably going to hate baseball because of you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I played a lot of sports as a kid. My parents never cared in that way. I mean, they were supportive.
They would show up and be like, yeah, go, Chris. Yeah. No, yeah, that's the good balance you want. My parents were supportive. Like, they always were like, and I got to a point where I wasn't really enjoying it, and I kind of kept doing it, and then eventually they're like, do you know what to do? So I'm like, no, not really. So that was kind of nice to eventually get out of it. But yeah, my folks were never the like yell and scream at referee types. Like I don't get what else is going wrong in your life where you do that. Or like, I haven't watched it, but that show Friday Night Tykes, which is like It's
like
set.
the
It's set in
kid
the
version
world.
of Friday Night Lights or something. It's like a documentary, right?
It's a documentary. It's set. It's like maybe documentary reality show. It's set in kind of the world of, like, Pee Wee football in Texas, where in Texas they take their amateur football really seriously.
Oh yeah, I mean
So
Friday Night Lights
there's
is an
like
amazing show,
adults-
but kind of true, right?
Yeah, there's adults like yelling and screaming at children, and kids like passing out. It's like crazy.
See, and maybe I don't know whether this is true for you growing up in Maryland. Like in New York, like no one ever even offered me like Pee Wee football. Like it was never even an option that was on the table, which I don't think I would have wanted to do it anyway because I never liked hitting people.
No, I hurt people a lot playing because I was so much bigger. So like if you tried to run into me, I'd knock you down.
But so you
Or
played
if I'm-
football growing up.
Oh no, I didn't. I never played American football. I just played soccer. My mom was afraid I'd get hurt playing American football, but I definitely like.
Your mom ahead of the times.
Yeah, way ahead of time. She knew about the concussions. She was a Redskins fan. She knew what was going on. So yeah, she never let me play American football, but like soccer. But like I remember like like trying to like take balls and like accidentally like stomping on people's feet or like jumping to kick balls and kicking kids in the stomach. Yeah. I felt sort of like, no, I didn't like that. I didn't like that feeling. I also was like a really overweight kid. I couldn't run. I'd get winded so quickly. I started to just really, really not enjoy it. And I was like, I'd rather just sit in my room alone and play video games. That's where, and that's why now I'm a stand-up comedian. So parallels. So you were playing American football and what else?
Oh, I never played. I played baseball. I
Baseball.
played basketball. Mm-hmm. And then when I got to high school, I started playing a lot of tennis. Just because like this is probably like the nature of being in middle school. Like middle school kids are terrible, and so I stopped wanting to be on teams anymore. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I'm just going to play tennis, and that way I just have to rely on myself. And if I have a good day, I have a good day for myself. If I have a bad day, I have a bad day for me. I was basically like Ivan Drago at the end of Rocky IV.
Yeah, exactly.
I do this for me.
Exactly. I felt kind of the same way, and I didn't feel good being on a team until I got to high school and did theater. That was so were you like, so you were like, I'm trying to picture like what kind of kid you were in like middle high school. Were you like the kind of like sporty athletic type or?
No, I would have been the sporty kid, I guess, in like middle school. But I didn't really play sports in high school. I was a debater. Mm-hmm. I did this thing called Student Congress in which high school kids running around calling each other senator. But it taught me, I mean, that because that ended up being sort of my thing. I did that in high school, and I did parliamentary debate in college, which was kind of a unique thing because it's very. You end up, first of all, you're going around to different schools every weekend, so it's kind of like a bit like a traveling fraternity / sorority, which is kind of weird. But then it's very impromptu. I probably should do more improv because I've kind of been practicing since then. Because the way it would work is that you present a case, like there'd be two teams, and one team would present a case, and the other team would have to respond to it, like not knowing what that case was.
Right.
So there's a lot of like, okay, we're going to talk about history or policy or like some really abstract hypothetical, and I've got to write a speech about this in 7 minutes that presents its own points and delivers a response to these other things.
Yeah.
And so it makes you think really fast. Like you've got to be really comfortable with speaking fast and speaking without having like lines. Like when I said I would have a speech written, I would have like sentences, and I would just sort of expound on it. I might have like a few things I wanted to hit, but but I loved doing. I was a debate kid and not like a theater kid. Like I never did high school theater. I never did college theater.
So you were, but to me, debate is performance just in a different type. It's not having a character and memorizing lines, but there's definitely an aspect to it that's kind of showman-like. So
yes.
was this debate like? Was this debate like? When I think of debate, I think of I think of two kids. They on a topic, and you create the pro side of your argument, and you try to deconstruct the other side. Is that what it was?
roughly speaking. But so the way it would work, so it's first of all, it was team based, which was kind of cool. It was like you and a partner.
Oh, cool.
And that was really fun because like the people who became my debate partners are especially ones from other schools, because you could mix and match if you wanted to. You didn't have to debate with someone from your own college. Those people are some of my best friends to this day. Like one of my the best man in my wedding I met because he was debating and I was judging, and he literally took his clothes off. It was some roundabout like public nudity laws or something, and to make a point he started like taking his clothes off.
What was his point he was trying to make?
I don't even remember.
And did he win?
He definitely won. He was way better than the other guy, other guys. But
did the other guy have the better point?
No. Well, although that's part of the thing you learn, right, is that it's not about having the best point. It's about how you say it. If you say the right thing the wrong way, it will not be as convincing as maybe something that's wrong, but that's said in a
confident way,
confident way, but also just a clear way, right? That and that you have to be able to rely. Like you can't. The interesting thing is because of the impromptu nature of it, you can't rely on facts. Like there are other types of debate, right, where you might have like a binder of of articles or something, and you're like, I'm going to quote the New York Times from this day, and this was not that at all. This had to be, you had to be able to speak to the judge's sort of intellect more than just here. Let me tell you a fact, because I can't look it up and prove that something is a fact or not. Right? If you tell me that something is true, I can believe you in a rough sense, but I can't prove that.
Yeah, because I always thought it was about like just having the most facts on your side that outweigh the pros of whatever the other argument was. But it sounds like that's maybe not the most important part of a debate.
Well, it depends on the style. Like there are different styles of debate. Like I can't even think of what they're called now. But that are more fact-based. Like there's a million different styles, and I happen to do one that was very open. Like the case that I ran the most was, first of all, it was op choice. So I would offer the opposition either side, and it was if you had the ability to inject people with knowledge, like the Matrix, and you could just inject all the world's knowledge into them in 10 minutes, should you replace the collegiate education system with that?
Wow.
And so there's no fact. That's not like a fact-based thing. That's a sort of a thing about.
That's a more nuanced thing.
Yeah. What does it mean? What is the value of a collegiate education beyond just injecting people with knowledge? Right?
Yeah. Well, it's 4 years of the first things I think of. It's 4 years of a social experience. So you're learning to be probably on your own by yourself for the first time. You're probably learning to like interact with other people for the first time, read situations, kind of stuff like that. That I would almost think of it as the difference between, like, the people get to. I've heard people describe it as like book smart and street smart. So like if someone who's really well read maybe might not be the best person to like navigate like a street fight or something, or talk their way out of a bar fight or something like that.
Right. And it's fascinating. It's been a long time since I thought about it, so I don't remember all the points off the top of my head, but it was one where I do think like you can make arguments on both ends. Like the idea of everyone having that knowledge for basically free would change the world, and you would have so many more people with a broader spectrum of knowledge. On the other hand, if you could inject someone with knowledge and they didn't have to be able, and your learning ability wasn't as important, nepotism would be a lot easier, right? Because a lot of the things that stop nepotism is, the kid's too dumb to do it.
Exactly. Whereas
sometimes you get an Ivanka and sometimes you get a Donald Jr.
Right. It just becomes a proximity thing. It's like, oh, they're close. Yeah, I'll put it, they're blind trust. There you go. I know this. I'm hoping eventually this all the election talk becomes like, oh, I wonder what that was. I hope people don't have to remember all this for too long, but probably.
Oh, I hope. I hope we look back at this and go, oh, well, we were so worried. I kind of think, I don't know, if the Berlusconi analogy is any good, basically, our country is going to be in not the best shape, but it's not going to like totally come apart. And Trump's just going to get rich off this. And that will be terrible. And that will be an awful thing. But the hope is that the actual impact on real people is not as bad as we're imagining.
Right. Exactly. That's what we have to work. That's what we have to work towards preventing.
Yeah. As we say this 2 weeks after.
Yeah. I almost said hope for, but now it's, now more than ever, it's you have to actually work to prevent it now. Okay, so you're doing debate in high school, and what did you go to college for?
I thought I was going to be a political science major, and then I decided I didn't like. I guess it was the professors really, because I mean I think the topics were interesting, but I just didn't like that sort of lens to look at the world. I actually majored in religion.
Religion, interesting. Were you brought up religious?
Not at all, which I think actually kind of helped in becoming a student of it, because my parents were just very sort of generically Catholic, and we were just kind of like, yeah, like we believe in this, but it wasn't like we went to church other than on Christmas. And in fact, we didn't go to church on Christmas until I asked my mom to take me when I was 12 because some of my friends were going. It was just some people, some of my friends I knew who grew up around me. They were like, "Oh, are you going to like the mass at 5:30?" And I was like, "Mom, like, should we go?" And she was like, "I mean, if you want to." In fact, like I went to a Catholic high school, and it's an amazing school, and it's a wonderful place. But when I was looking at that, my mom was like, "Are you okay with that? Like taking like religion classes?" And I was like, "Sure. I mean, they could be interesting," and they ended up being kind of fascinating.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to approach it, because you can maybe approach it a little more. I don't want to say maybe objectively is the word. If you aren't brought up on it, and maybe you have some kind of like built-in bias for or against it. So where'd you go to college?
I went to a place called Haverford in suburban Philadelphia. It's a tiny little liberal arts college. 1,100 kids. Honor code that's actually administered by the students. I was the chairman of an organization. This is a real organization called the Joint Student Administration Alcohol Policy Panel, which administered the alcohol policy at Haverford, which was basically you can drink in your dorms, you can drink in areas adjacent to your dorms. If you're going to walk across campus with a drink, do it in an opaque container so that you don't create an environment that is hostile to non-drinkers. And just sort of like don't drink in like classroom buildings. Don't be an idiot, basically. Be like an adult, essentially.
So kind of like a self-governing sort of situation.
Totally, very self-governing.
Yeah, and you're so you go to college in suburban Philadelphia from being a native New Yorker. Is that I wonder if that's a culture shock? Only because my girlfriend's a native New Yorker, and the couple times we've gone outside of a major city, a couple of days she gets a little batty.
It was, and that's part of why I ended up choosing Haverford, was that I decided I wanted to get out of New York City for college.
Yeah.
Because it felt, I don't know, I'd seen like real college campuses, and they seemed like places I wanted to be, as opposed to at like NYU and just sort of surrounded by the city.
Right.
Because I went to high school in Manhattan too, so I'd spent 4 years sort of in the city all the time.
Yeah. So you needed a break.
Yeah, and I just wanted to see something that was a little bit different. But the nice thing was that we were like 20 minutes outside Philadelphia. So mentally, I knew that I could get to the city fast. Not that I spent all that much time in Philadelphia when I was in college. Like, we went to the city sometimes, but it was mostly to see a concert, or mostly to see concerts. I'm sure there's a couple other times we went, but it's sometimes to buy records, because there were a couple of better record stores. There was actually a really great record store in Haverford, the town. But there were also great record stores in Philly, and I worked at the radio station, so sometimes we would like go into the city just to buy like a lot of records.
Oh, absolutely. So you did radio also. I'm going to parse this out because this is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
So. Well, I want to do the religion degree, and then I want to get into Radio.
Sure.
Which maybe as a broadcaster, I don't know if how you feel about my on mic technique, but maybe I'm.
Oh, I never probably learned good technique. I don't know. I'm just
super. So I'm curious. So you studied religion. Is that kind of all the religions, or is there a specific track or focus?
It's pretty broad. In a smaller school like Haverford, you end up kind of getting pushed in certain directions because of the expertise of the professors, right? So you're not going to cover. They're gonna cover specific sorts of things. So you kind of get pushed towards studying some of those, and those things ended up being really interesting to me. I had two professors that I spent a lot of time with. One was an early Christianity expert. And in fact, what sort of got me interested is I took a class with her on the letters of Paul. And she kind of goes through them. In the Bible, they're sort of basically structured by length. And there's not really any order to them. And so I don't even think I'd read them other than some of the basic stuff that we all know, like, love is patient, love is kind, that sort of stuff. But looking at them from a historical perspective, you can literally trace the development of Christianity in terms, because he's writing, because people are asking him, he's an apostle, and people are asking him questions like he's formed this community in some place, he's gone somewhere else, and now people are like, well, what do we do, this thing has come up, and he's making it up on the fly basically. And that's just sort of a fascinating thing to watch a religion develop culturally, in a way that historically it's very difficult to do in America with anything other than like Scientology. And Mormonism. And so that I thought I found really fascinating, because I'm interested in culture and people, and I kind of think all of the humanities are basically the same thing through different lenses, like studying religion versus sociology versus history versus philosophy. It's all just different ways to study the same stuff. It's all just different ways to get at people trying to think about the world around them and what that means to them, which is how I sort of got to the second professor I studied a lot with was really into like modern American history, and not just religions in the sense of like Mormonism or something like that, but the way America itself is religious in the sort of the broader, it's America isn't a religion, but there's a religious nature to the way we view the world. And I actually ended up writing a thesis about Christian hair metal bands.
Okay, now you're speaking my language.
Yeah, now you're like, okay.
Okay, because I understand all of those branches you just discussed are different ways that people are ultimately trying to figure out their place and to kind of make sense in a way so you can kind of ultimately, I feel, get through your day. So, and I think in a way, especially if you talk to some real metalheads, that's definitely a religion in of itself. So your thesis was on Christian metal bands. So I'm guessing Stryper.
Stryper is the main discussion.
Yellow and Black Attack.
Yellow and Black Attack. I listened to a lot of Stryper what happened is I went to that professor and I was like, I've got two strains of thought that I'm thinking about, like televangelists and Christian bands. And he was like, have you ever seen Stryper? And I was like, no. And he pulls them up and I was like, oh my God, that's everything I want to think about for the next 6 months. And so basically,
they were fascinating. They used to like throw Bibles out into the crowd.
Still do. I went to see their show maybe 10 years ago at BB King's, and they still throw Bibles into the crowd. And so, but the thing was, so they were obviously, they think they're preaching the Christian gospel. And people like Jimmy Swaggart were saying, no, hair metal is the devil. Like, this is the devil's music. And what I wrote about is the way that this exemplified essentially a very historically consistent theme in evangelical Christianity, which is that evangelical Christians come up with a new way to express a religion, and then people who did it the way right before them tell them that that's evil. So Jimmy Swaggart, who played music and played like like blues piano, like he was cousins with Jerry Lee Lewis. He was saying, oh, Stryper's the devil because you play metal. People 30 years before that were like, Jimmy Swaggart's the devil, he plays rock and roll music. And then and it's just all a cycle. Like evangelicals were the first Christians to come up with doing like very theatrical performances about religion in general. So it's always this fascinating cycle of just of being told you're the devil and then being co-opted, right? Because now everyone thinks Christian music is okay. At least
Yeah.
most people do, I think.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of there's a lot of bands. Like I was really into Reliant K when I was in high school. They're a pop punk band, but their stuff is very their early stuff was more overtly religious, like in their lyrics, and mentioned God a lot more. I think they've strayed away from it as their career has gone on, but they were really great. They were a fun band. MXPX gets thrown into that camp as well.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. I think it's hard as a Christian band to have like a long career in the sense that if you're Bob Dylan, you write about like what's happening in your life. And if you're a Christian band, a lot of times, if you're telling that basic story, you know, like there's only so many ways you can say, you know, Christ helped me through this, right? Like
exactly, because eventually you'll be like, oh, Christ continues me to be awesome. So what did you learn about? I'm curious, what did you find about Stryper? Find out about Stryper that was like really fascinating.
I think really I was more fascinated by. I mean, they're interesting, but they're saying I think an inherently reasonable thing, which is that we believe in God. Mm-hmm. We love this sort of art. We are going to use that art to express how we feel. And I'm always more fascinated by the people who are able to draw these divisions and say, no, like that's wrong somehow. Mm-hmm. Because I'm just always mind blown by that, because the idea that like some piece of a form of art could intrinsically be evil seems so strange to me. That the logic pretzels they wrap themselves into of like, well, like if it's a certain volume,
if there's a certain amount of distortion, if it goes at a certain pace,
right.
if the singer hits a certain octave,
or it's a gateway drug to something like Motley Crue, as if someone who was listening to those two records couldn't discern the difference between Motley Crue lyrics and Stryper lyrics as like...
Yeah, they're not in the same category at all. Or do you remember the band Wasp?
I remember them. I don't think I ever really listened to them.
One of their big songs was called Fuck Like a Beast.
Okay.
You could not put Wasp and Blackie Lawless up against Michael Stryper singing Honestly.
Right. Although, which is honestly though, is probably their least Jesus-y song.
Yeah, I agree. What was their... Oh, To Hell with the Devil.
To Hell with the Devil is
that was
the
the
one.
other one.
Yes, I bought a T-shirt because Stryper. I bought a T-shirt with like, it says "To Hell with the Devil," and there's like missiles with each of the band members' initials that are being like shot at the, I guess the moon or something. I guess the idea is that the devil. I don't know. It was an odd piece of imagery, but. Yeah,
that could be written. The iconography of like blowing up like the devil and the moon with your God Rock, because they called themselves God Rock. I remember hearing that in one interview.
Maybe they are God Rockets. Maybe that's the part of the idea.
Rockets. I did not think we were going to talk about Stryper. I don't talk about Stryper very often, but
nor do I. I mean, it comes up because people ask, like I talk about writing thesis and I talk about that because most of my friends wrote far more serious things. Mm-hmm. But I think that stuff is serious. I mean, I think talking about...
Yeah.
I wrote about... at some point in college, I wrote about the Beatles on Ed Sullivan as a religious moment in America. Religious in the sense that it shaped the country's worldview. Because that's really a moment in which we shift towards a youth culture.
Oh, absolutely. I think so. Because the youth culture, like... That was in 1964, the Beatles were on Sullivan? It's
63 or 64. It's 64 because it's like 3 months after JFK gets shot.
Yeah.
It's February of 64.
Right. So you think about the 50s and you think about, I feel like the youth culture in the 50s, like like Greasers, like T-Birds, the musical Grease, all that's imagery. That feels like a subculture almost compared to the more, what feels like the Beatles breaking through in the youth and the screaming girls, like youthful pop music. Which is the equivalent of your popular hymns. It's the mainstream moment of that sort of that.
Yeah, and I don't think
music.
I don't actually, my sense is that stuff like the greaser culture was not as mainstream as television from the 70s would probably tell us. You know, that our images of that are kind of like the way we imagine 50s diners, which is a construct of something that only sort of existed. Have you ever read, is it Foucault? Like simulacrums?
I don't think I've read that, no.
So just the idea that like a simulacrum is something that is a copy of something that never really existed. It's sort of like, again, like the idea
like
of
it happened
the 50s
once.
diner.
Yeah, it happened once. Or like, did you ever see the movie Diner?
No.
It's a pretty good movie. It's like a really classic Baltimore kind of movie. But yeah, that's sort of like all silver. Like, how many of those diners actually existed?
Right.
There's just like, it happened once, and then a lot of people think it's cool, so everyone thinks that it was everywhere.
Yeah. But yeah, so I did that, and I did radio. Let's segue back though. But like, so I was the music director for WHRC, which at the time I think still had a frequency, although it definitely doesn't have it anymore. And we were mostly an online station. I also had, to segue back to the politics stuff a little bit, I had my show was a show with a friend of mine called Two Blowhards in a Room.
That's a great name for like so it was a talk show?
It was a talk show. We played music. Like we would talk for a while and then we would play a couple songs.
Okay.
Mostly Meatloaf. Just to screw with people. But what we would do, the idea behind the show initially was that like he was a Democrat, I was a Republican, and we were going to like argue about issues. And then as we became better friends and kept talking about these things, we realized that we mostly just agreed.
Yeah, that's fun. Those are fun moments to have. Like,
but we kept doing the show for 3.5 years, and it was just us talking about stuff. Like it rapidly got rid of the like they're going to be on different sides, and it was just us talking about whatever came to our minds.
Yeah. Now that's a show I wish could exist, especially on TV, because I feel like that sort of discourse and discussion is gone because it's not like doesn't sell ads, or it's people don't watch it, and this like clickbait, like hyper partisan one way or the other, like, oh, I need to get money, so I need to infuriate people in one sentence.
I believe we'll eventually get to some agreement that's a little bit like what my friend Dave and I had, which was essentially that I think we were pretty much in agreement on social issues. And then, you know, something would happen that was more like economic driven, and we'd have like a conversation about that. Like, you know, what's a good economic policy in dealing with poverty or something like that.
Yeah.
I think there's interesting conversations to be had there, in part because you can have a nuanced perspective on that. Like, I don't think there's much of a nuanced perspective left on gay marriage.
No, I don't think so. It's pretty much just the people that are for it and then the people that can't let it go.
Exactly. And that's where I think, again, where the Republican Party has sort of gone in this direction, where that's sort of pushed anyone who's for a lot of those more liberal positions on social issues, although I would argue in a lot of ways are what we would think of as conservative in the past, right? Where like conservative in the sense where government stays out and just says, hey, you want to marry whoever the hell you want, go for it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
which
I won't get into my personal politics.
No, yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. So you're doing radio, and your debate radio show turns into like a nice chat show.
Yeah, we would do a lot of, the fun thing we actually did was political music. Like we found this CD of this guy named Ray Corona, who was basically from the 60s and was still churning out these songs. And we had a really interesting time because we found the CD and we started listening to it. And Ray had these really kind of funny ways to put it. Like he had this song basically about how corporations were going to take over space called Outer Space Incorporated. And he was not a great singer. And even lyrically, he was not particularly clever. But there was something so earnest and kind of fascinating about him. We found out he lived in New Jersey, and we invited him in, and we said, hey, do you want to come up and like tape an interview show with us? And he did. And it was this kind of really interesting thing to do, because there's part of us as like snarky 20-year-olds that kind of wanted to make fun. But we also were like, well, we're not going to be dicks, right? And so it was a really interesting thing to do, to sort of like to try and engage with that earnestness when we were at a place in our lives that was very not earnest, except for having fun with the songs. Like we did actually like a version of that song Outer Space Inc., in which we sang the backing vocals on the chorus, which are bop shoo bop shoo bop shoo op shoo op, bop shoo bop shoo bop cash, bop shoo bop shoo bop shoo op shoo op, bop shoo bop trash. Which was a good time. I still have a recording of it somewhere because we were smart enough to at least tape those.
Absolutely. Nice.
Yeah.
So you did that show for 3 years and you finished college, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Cool. And so you get your degree. What happens next? I'm trying to see how a well-adjusted young man who debates gets into the world of comedy.
Well, it had always been sort of a thing that was sitting there. So I decided to go to law school.
Where'd you go to law school?
I went to law school at Cardozo, which is at like 12th and 5th.
So
back in New York.
So okay. So after college, you come back to New York, and what area of law did you go to for?
So I went thinking that I was going to do intellectual property law and do like something with music or something like that. And I ended up, through a confluence of events, becoming a tax lawyer, which is really interesting to me on a certain theoretical basis, but I'm not something that I'm deeply passionate about from an emotional perspective. I think tax law is really interesting, and you learn a lot about policy, and there's a lot of interesting things to be said about tax law. And it happens to just sort of suit the way I think pretty well. Like it's sort of something that came pretty naturally to me. But I mostly picked it because it seemed like the easiest thing to do at a big law firm. It seemed like the thing that would least destroy my life, because the tax lawyers seemed like the happiest ones at the law firm.
I would imagine so. I imagine tax law is a lot less emotionally taxing than criminal law, or even like litigation.
Right. And the hours are just a bit less insane, because you're not working on deals as much. You're getting asked a question, and you're kind of more of an intellectual. Like you get to sit there and think about it and work out what the answer is and come back to someone.
Yeah.
For the most part. I mean, sometimes it's not like that. And I worked in environments at times where it was very much not like that. But it's better than, again, something like litigation or being like a contract attorney. And part of the interesting thing is that the reason why because when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to either be a lawyer or a writer. And I actually wrote, my freshman year in college, I wrote a screenplay that was semi-autobiographical. Well, it was autobiographical. The first draft is autobiographical, and then my screenwriting professor told me, this is super anticlimactic. And I was like, well, that's what happened. And he was like, well, you realize you get to make it up. And I was like, oh, shoot, I can. So I'd written a screenplay, but I kind of thought that if I was going to be a writer and I was going to succeed at it, that I needed to want that really badly. And I didn't get the sense within myself when I was in college. And I don't know whether this was me deluding myself or whether I was right, and it just happened to be something that I had to get to later in life, that I just didn't think I had the deep enough desire to do it. It wasn't something that I like had to do in order to fulfill myself. I could do other things that were fulfilling as well. Like I liked writing, but I also liked other things. I also liked I liked law school. Like a lot of people hated it. I really enjoyed it. It like spoke to something in the way I like to think, and I had a great time. Just again, funny to say, but mostly law school was pretty interesting. And so while I was in law school, we had this like show called Law Review, REVUE.
So is this your first time you think you're going to do any kind of writing or performing?
The first time I was thinking about doing performing outside of, again, debate is kind of like, is very performative.
Yeah.
But like, that's the first time I actually thought I was going to write. Like I watched it happen my first year in law school, and I thought to myself, I should write for this.
Yeah.
And so I submitted some sketches for the next year, because it's this long show, and they do it once a year, and it's sketches and songs like about law school. And I submitted some things, and they were like, oh, we really like a couple of these, why don't you act in them? And I was like, well, I don't act. And they were like, try it. And I was like, all right. And so I did, which was like it's one of the reasons why I'm kind of a weird actor, is that I was trained to act by like musical theater people.
Right, which is very like very different style from like a straight play. Like being like in Anything Goes very different from being in Glengarry Glen Ross.
Right.
So
There's a lot of cheating out and singing to the audience.
yes.
I
lot.
just motioned with my hands, which I do a lot, and we'll like look to the side. And it's like, no, there's no one here.
Yeah,
there's a theoretical audience.
Yes, I just look to the side, and in my mind, before every big solo, there's always like a spotlight and then a slight upward glance to the right.
I definitely had a couple of those moments in law review as it went on. And yeah, but even then, I didn't really think about doing like comedy for a living. I thought it was just a thing that I did on the side. I did a lot of karaoke because I love singing. I love music.
Yes.
And it was my birthday party 6 years ago now. And I was singing with a friend of mine. We were doing very dramatic things. And someone came up to us afterwards and was like, "Have you ever heard of a karaoke league?" And we were like, "No, what's that?" And they're like, "You should join." And so I sort of, as I was being a lawyer, kind of delved into the world of competitive karaoke.
Competitive karaoke.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah. I love everything about where this is going.
So what competitive karaoke starts as people thinking, oh, I'll do some sort of funny thing while I sing. And it ends in basically doing sketches around someone singing. That are totally like giant and performative with lots of costumes and lots of I did the one I'm most proud of is a performance in which I did the Kanye West song Runaway as Anthony Weiner.
This is the beginnings of your sketch training right here.
Exactly. And I actually did the best part is the Pusha T part in the middle.
Yeah.
I transformed that into Anthony Weiner talking to his wife. So the part where he's like, this is what the program is, and you better get used to it.
Yeah.
Which was, if you haven't thought about it, like look up that Kanye West song Runaway and look at the lyrics, and then realize that they were written for Anthony Weiner, basically. So yeah, and that got me into just sort of doing that like a lot, like doing a lot of that kind of writing.
Yeah.
And especially since I did a lot of it with like very skilled performers, but I ended up being the main writer because I'm not a singer.
Right.
So I didn't do very much singing, but I would so my job was to come up with things for these really talented people to do.
Yeah.
And then I would be the one who'd be like the one who's running on the side and doing something crazy because I lacked a sense of shame. So, my friend would sing something and I would be in a nude bodysuit dancing. Another person actually who was in my wedding, the third time we ever met, because we were on a team together and I'd suggested this thing and he agreed to do it. He sang the song Tempted by Squeeze, Tempted by the Fruit of Another. And we did this thing where there were a couple of girls who were dancing in like nude bodysuits with like different fruit. And I danced. I'm sort of the capper, rule of threes, right? And you learn that, right?
Gotta do it.
I'm the capper and I'm wearing a nude bodysuit and dancing with a banana. And I said, just, kind of go with it, like kind of improv, just like, look, we're going to do that. And I'm just going to play with the banana a little bit, like kind of figure it out. And by the end of it, he was on his knees eating a banana from my crotch.
Classic.
He was a groomsman in my wedding.
Can never go wrong with that.
Can never go wrong with that. That video was the first thing when my wife and I met and she started talking to her mother about me. That was the first thing she showed her that with a picture of me in it she showed her a video of that performance. And she, my mother-in-law still likes me. So she was okay with seeing me dance around in a nude bodysuit, feeding a banana to a dude.
That's good. The test of what your significant other thinks about you, because I had something similar. I did a short film a few years ago where there's a scene in where I axe murder an entire room of people to prevent a zombie apocalypse, of course.
Of course.
And there's a video of me and I had really long hair and I'm wearing a suit and I've got a real axe and I'm like, like it's the kind of picture that if I snap gets shown on the news, that kind of picture.
Right.
And there's also one from when I did my web series where I'm like going down my hallway here with a giant knife. So my girlfriend showed her mom these pictures before she met me. And the fact that she still likes me it's really nice to know.
Yeah. Well, that's openness. But then my mother-in-law is someone who was so, we have an open relationship because the first time I met my mother-in-law, she was real drunk and she was like, I think you're my daughter's soulmate. And I was like, Kathy, that is a super creepy thing to say, and would be really problematic if I didn't totally agree with you.
So you met your now wife like right as you were starting to do comedy?
A little bit before that, because we met doing Karaoke League.
Okay, that's
the first
good.
thing she ever said to me was, let me tuck that in for you. There's a tag coming out of your dress.
That's nice.
Yes.
That's because I'm always curious about, because I know a couple of people where in long-term relationships where the then comedy starts. So I'm always curious how the spouses react, because my girlfriend sometimes feels like comedy is a burden on some of my friends like wives and stuff. So but she was doing the karaoke is also.
Yeah. She's a performer, and and that's, I think, one of the beauty of our relationship is in part that I had, like, by the time we ever had a date, I had bared myself in front of her in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So you were doing anything for love, including that.
Yes, all of that.
To bring it back to Meatloaf. Did you ever sing any Meatloaf?
They're really bad karaoke songs because they're so long. Like when I was a kid, one of the first times I did karaoke, I did Paradise by the Dashboard Light with someone, and I just remember the sinking feeling of just dying. Like you're like 4 minutes through, no one is looking at you anymore. They're all waiting for the next song, and you realize there's 4 minutes left.
Yeah, exactly. My thing, the couple of times I've done karaoke, because I don't seek it out very often, but if it's there, I'll do it. Like one of my go-tos for a while was "Hey Jealousy" by the Gin Blossoms, and the most awkward part of any karaoke moment is the guitar solo, because you're just kind of standing there going, "All right, chime back in eventually." I also was a emo kid in high school, so I always sing stuff like "Hey Jealousy" or "Mr. Brightside" by the Killers. Like
Mr. Brightside's a good one though. Not a long guitar solo, kind of keeps itself going. People like that song.
I like that song. I like that song a lot. But that's like when I think of like angst and the Killers, that's the song I think of.
It's one of the more classically angsty of their songs. They have a lot of angsty songs.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about, because I was listening to the new Robbie Williams album, and there's a song on there that I was like, it sounds kind of like a Killer song. And I look, and apparently it's one they'd written. They wrote a song and gave it to him, or I don't know how that happened. But
interesting, because there's a Motley Crue song from their greatest hits package that Simple Plan wrote, but Simple Plan didn't use it. So if you listen to it, I'm like, oh, this is like if Motley Crue were Simple Plan. It's really fast. It's really interesting. I love stuff like that. So okay. So let's see if maybe I can tie this all together, because well, how long have you known Mike? And for those of you who don't listen, the reason I know Chris is because I do tech for them at the Pit, and I'm also really glad that I'm doing like a story from my show, because whenever I meet people in a comedy setting and I'm doing like something else, like when I was working the door at a place, it's always, I'm like, how do I let them know that I am a comedian also? Right. So I'm really psyched to get to do a set on your show. How long have you and Mike known each other?
We've known each other about a year and a half now. So I picked up, this is almost 2 years ago to the day now. I picked up Joe Toplin's book, like writing for late night TV.
Yeah.
Basically to get ideas for like writing for karaoke. And I read it and I thought to myself, like, why, this sounds like fun. Why don't I do this? Just that moment of like, I remember, because I was reading it, I was on a plane ride to my bachelor party in Chicago, just sitting there going like, I should be doing straight, because at a certain point, like I love doing karaoke, and doing those pieces was really fulfilling and really interesting because I love music and combining music and comedy. But I was sort of hitting the end of my road with that because there's when you're tied to a lyric track, there's only so much you can actually do in your humor.
Right.
And at a certain point, my friends and I had done it and we'd been like really intense about it. And there just wasn't much that we wanted to do. Like we'd done all of the crazy ideas.
Yeah.
You know,
you're sort of reaching as far as you can go in the competitive karaoke world.
Yeah. I was also running at that point. By that point, I was running the league. As with my wife and a friend of ours, we had ended up starting a different league, Gotham City Karaoke, which still exists. A plug for them. And I don't know. I just wasn't enjoying doing that. And so I was like, well, I start writing jokes and sketch. I just have to just start doing that sort of stuff again.
Yeah. And did you ever like do classes at the Pit or UCB, or did
that's
you
how
just
I met
dive
Mike.
right into it?
Yeah. I started taking writing classes at the Pit, the sketch writing classes.
Yeah.
And Mike and I met in level 2 with the wonderful Chris Aurelio, and we tried to form a group out of that, and it didn't succeed. And then we took level 3, and we were in with a bunch of people who were already a group together. And so at the end of that, Mike and I were just like, well, screw forming a whole group. Let's just do this ourselves.
Yeah.
In part because, we talked about like teams and stuff. I took a personality test this summer for a work thing. And one of the questions, it was basically about like,
is it the color one where it tells you like what color you are, or like the
I'm
letters?
sure it's similar to that, where it's like 4 quadrants and there's like a couple of axes. But one of the questions was like, are you competitive or cooperative? And I realized that like I am a competitive person, but I like to be competitive on a team of like-minded people. Like,
yes.
I like being on a team, and I get more out of, I think, being on a team than doing something by myself. But I want to be on a team with people who are like really focused on the same sorts of things. And Mike and I kind of realized like we're focused on the same things. It's maybe not a coincidence that we both have worked at like Big 4 accounting firms. Mike currently, me in the past. But that we both sort of have a certain sensibility and, kind of treat this stuff like a job. Like,
yeah, which is important. A lot of people, it gets bandied about around, but it is kind of important. And I just read this really great Tumblr post that Emily Gordon, who Kumail Nanjiani's wife, she was the producer of The Meltdown, that stand-up show in LA, and she was kind of just running down like how you run a great show, and I was like, oh, it's very similar to like, just kind of put a little bit of put effort into it, like.
Right. I mean, a sketch group or someone's stand-up career, it's just a small business in certain ways.
Exactly. We're all our own LLCs.
Yeah. And you realize because again, I ran that karaoke business, and doing that, first of all, you realize sort of the different skills that you need to make something happen, and sort of recognizing what your skills are and the limitation. Like,
right.
My wife is an amazing marketer. She's super great at putting these things together. She does it for a living too. And I knew other people who were good at certain aspects of sort of legal stuff, and they were really important. And I was really good at negotiation for stuff. I met Ali actually through negotiating to use Pioneer's Bar for Karaoke League, which was an interesting experience. But yeah, just sort of like figuring out like what your own skills are and realizing, okay, like here's what I'm not good at, but here's what I got to make sure I get someone else to do, because like I'm not great at graphics. Like I have decent ideas.
Yeah.
And we have friends who've come through and been like, we're like, here's our vision for like a logo for this thing. And they design it and like, it's awesome.
Yeah.
But just realizing that you need that, right? And kind of making sure like, okay, here are all the things you need. And, just being self-aware about your own limitations.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to know as much as I can, but then also be able to know what would be smart to kind of farm out, or, make some new friends, make some friends, kind of. So how long you been doing Backdoor Barbecue, the show I help you with?
Backdoor Barbecue, you got in pretty early, actually. That was
Sweet.
you teched the second show we ever did.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we did it for the first time as part of the pilot season of The Pit in July.
Oh, yeah?
And we're able, out of that, Ronnie liked the show, and we were able to sort of get him to give us like a 3-show run for the fall, which it's been cool because we were really open with him about, okay, so we just did this show with the two of us, and we don't know what the show is going forward exactly. Like, we know that we've got the two of us. It's definitely going to have a weekend update sort of piece, and we definitely want to keep doing these like kind of introduction duologues with every show. But other than that, like, we'll figure this out as we go. Like, we'll see if anyone ends up becoming a permanent member, or see if anyone ends up writing stuff, or who's going to be the actors, or what the show is going to look like on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And we're starting to get there, but even then, like, it's a process, and we're sort of trying to stay open to what comes along, and because you want it to reflect, in part, like, I feel like my sensibility as a writer is still developing.
Do you write most of? I'm curious of the shows that I've worked on that I've seen. Are you writing a lot of the news and review jokes? Are you writing a lot of? What are some of the sketches you were writing? I'm curious, like, where you feel your strengths are and what are you seeing you want to do that you're not doing yet?
We split it about 50-50. Depending on the show, there might be more sketches that are Mike's or mine. But we've written everything so far. And even the news and review jokes are pretty much about half and half. Like, we both write those, and we just kind of come in with a giant stack of those, decide which ones we like the best, and have like come in with a long list to our director, and she goes, that one, not that one. You know, we kind of just trust her, because otherwise we'll just sort of sit there spinning our wheels all day. But yeah, so I mean, I really like writing the monologue type stuff, the jokes, and I like doing the characters that come in. Like, those are generally mine. The character, because I'll come out and either be myself or do a character that kind of comes in as part of the weekend update. It's called News and Review. Mike always tells me it's News and Review, and I'm like, it's weekend update.
It's one of my favorite parts of the show, because I love a really nice topical, like, setup punch kind of joke.
Yeah, and it's something that we both really like doing. And I kind of want to get better, though, at doing the more long form kind of stuff. The John Oliver kind of thing, or what Seth Meyers kind of does.
Yeah, I love them. I think what they do is so good.
Well, and in part, like, what they do feels very current. It feels very, it's sort of speaking to the way I feel about the world right now. And that's why, like, I made the joke about Jimmy Fallon earlier, but, like, some people aren't looking for that from the world right now, and that's okay. Like, everyone, different strokes for different folks. But for me, I feel like I have a certain, a little bit of anger about the way the last year has gone, for the country. But I also feel like being more fact-based and more, doing the research for people, and showing them, okay, it's not just here's a joke about what Trump said yesterday, but, like, we're going to need to stay up on, what's the Trump Foundation doing? What are his business holdings doing? And you're doing a job of informing people in addition to telling them jokes.
Which I think is a great way to inform people, because it's a spoonful of sugar kind of approach. Because I think a lot of times, and I'll say this with people I agree with and people I disagree with, the likability factor in trying to convince somebody of something, I think, is important. Because if you come off as condescending or rude to someone, even if they agree with you, they'll get defensive.
Agreed. I mean, that's why it's hard. I mean, you talk about the styles of someone like a John Oliver or a Samantha Bee, and I understand how people can get turned off by that. I also think to some extent though, shows like that don't have to be about convincing people who have completely diametric perspectives. It can be about keeping the person who does agree with them informed about what's going on.
Yeah.
And that can be a really valuable thing. And frankly, I was hoping, my hope, like for the last 6 months, has been, okay, Trump's going to lose, and then I can write, those long form pieces about something that's not Trump. Because I really like writing about. There's all sorts of interesting issues. I worked on. I had someone was in a sketch class with who used to work for MSNBC, who now works for MoveOn.org. And we wrote something that one of the MSNBC anchors did, and for like a little video, but it was about like low-income housing issues in like small towns in like places like Massachusetts, places that are like liberal, but then say, not in our backyard.
Yeah.
And that to me is a really important issue. I'm fascinated by, like, I work pretty extensively with a charitable organization that deals with women who've been incarcerated and their kids, and helping them get back into society and helping them get job training.
That's really important.
It's super important, and it's an issue that I want to talk about, and I wish I had the chance to sort of be discussing those things not through the lens of Donald Trump. On the other hand, maybe it'll keep people interested in issues like that.
Maybe
as Trump does something dumb, as Jeff Sessions, as his attorney general, does something dumb, maybe that'll raise awareness. Kanye said the other day that, this brought the racists out of the closet.
Yeah.
And then he said he would have voted for Trump, which is weird. But he didn't vote. And then he had a meltdown, and my New Year's Eve plans got canceled.
You were going to see him?
I had tickets for that show, which would have been fun. I like going to concerts, and that would have been a fun way to ring in the New Year's. But I'll just go to a different concert now.
Yeah. If you ever get the chance, and maybe this might be a good button to this conversation. If you ever get the chance, the best concert and the best New Year's concert I've ever been to in my life was I think maybe like 4 years ago, was Go-Go Bordello at Terminal 5.
I've heard they're amazing. Like, one of my favorite musicians, a guy named Jesse Malin, had toured with them, and there was a hilarious song sort of about touring with those guys, in which they're touring through Russia, and there's this refrain that the lead singer of Go-Go Bordello, the gypsy keeps on playing his nylon string guitar. As all this stuff is happening, he's just wandering around and playing
that's
guitar.
Exactly what he does. Like, turbocharged gypsy sounding punk rock. And their lead singer was an actor in the movie Everything is Illuminated.
Never seen that. I've never seen a lot of movies.
It's an Elijah Wood movie from when I was in college. He plays, I think he's supposed to be Ukrainian in the movie. I'm probably getting that wrong, but it's a really kind of cool, like, quiet, like, not mumblecore because it kind of precedes it, but sort of like independent tone of a movie. I thought it was quite enjoyable. But Go-Go Bordello, like, oh my gosh, I've never been in a mosh pit that took up the entire floor. I started on one side of the venue. I got swirled around. It's not really like a punching, kicking mosh pit. It's more of like just a swirl. Everyone's just dancing in a circle. And I just got bounced off of every wall in Terminal 5. It was amazing.
Something about being at a show, I really kind of like being in my own world in certain ways. And so don't love necessarily like being in a mosh pit just because it means that if someone like bounces into me, I'd like it throws.
You got to interact with them.
Yeah, not that I don't want to interact with them necessarily, but that like I don't want to have that interaction where they're sort of being forced on me. It's one thing if I'm talking to someone next to me and like, oh man, that song we're having a moment together or something, but like someone like jumping into me, and I've never actually thought of it that way, but I think that's why, because I see a lot of bands that have mosh pits and they're coming back.
Yeah,
and I just sometimes don't like. We've talked about, we both really like the band The Gaslight Anthem.
Oh, they are so good.
They're amazing, but
saw them at Terminal 5 also. That was a great show.
I've seen them a few times at Terminal 5. But my favorite shows of theirs, we were talking about, my favorite show was that one at PNC Art Center, in part just because I was able to kind of dance around and really enjoy those songs without the threat of like anyone coming around and be able to be as close to the stage as I want to, because normally like the mosh pit's in front of the stage, so I'm at a Gaslight Anthem show, I'm like in the balcony like looking down on them.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Like if it's a band I really like, I like to just focus in on the songs. Go-Go Bordello, I had listened to them, but I wasn't like super familiar with all their songs, so I was a little more up to just kind of like party and ricochet off of everybody in the building.
Right.
This will be my last question. This has been a great conversation. I hope that this has been a good chat.
That's been super fun.
Excellent.
I've been listening to your podcast because you told me about your podcast and I hadn't started listening to it, and I was like, oh shit, Will's a really good interviewer.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah. I try to just like I try to like interject sparingly because I like seeing where people go, and I'll just kind of like nudge them certain ways when I want to. Thanks, man. I really appreciate that.
No problem.
So to close out, what would you say is the best concert you've ever been to?
There's a lot of them.
For any reason, most fun, favorite band, like.
Well, to tie this into something we talked about earlier, I talked about moving back to New York after college. The first time I ever saw Ryan Adams at the Beacon Theater.
Oh, cool.
I'm
obsessed with his song. I'm thinking Bryan Adams is Summer '69.
Yeah.
Ryan, I'm obsessed with that Ryan Adams song, New York, New York. That's like been one of my favorite songs for years.
So this is the perfect story then. So I was at the time I was thinking about what I was going to do after college, because I knew I was going to apply to law school, and I was like, I don't know, where do I want to go back to the city, or do I want to go somewhere else like DC or Philly or whatever? I just wasn't sure. And I went to see him, and I was really getting into his music. I was listening to his music like all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I was super excited. I actually came up because he wasn't playing Philly on that tour. Uh-huh. So I came back to New York for the night just to like go to the Beacon Theater and see the show. And I was thinking that all this stuff was on my mind, and he plays this like amazing kind of ramshackle show. It was right after he'd come back from like breaking his wrist. Uh-huh. So he's playing all these new songs and all these weird versions of old songs. And at one point in the show, he just like sends the band away, mm-hmm. and he played New York, New York acoustic.
Nice.
And I remember just sitting there going like, just thinking about New York, going like, I'm moving back to New York. I love New York. I'm a New Yorker. Uh-huh. What am I thinking about being anywhere else other than New York for the rest of my life?
Right.
I'm coming back. And I just made that, I just knew it in my heart. Like, but somehow seeing him sing that song, like spurred that, like made me realize. And I've seen him a lot of times since then. I've seen some amazing shows, but like, that's maybe the moment that sticks out the most. I could tell you a lot of, we'll do it after. I could tell you a lot of Ryan Adams stories. I've like been to a lot of different states to see that dude.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool, man. That's
never
awesome.
Another country. I've been to other countries to see certain other artists, and I've never traveled internationally to see Ryan Adams, but
there's still time, I bet.
There's still time. He's played so much in New York that like, it wasn't like I was hurting to see Ryan Adams shows.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like I couldn't just take a train down to like a city that's a couple hours away and see one more Ryan Adams show if I was really excited.
Yeah.
As opposed to bands that like don't tour in the US sometimes, or haven't done it very sparingly.
Yeah. So the next time Stryper hit New York, we'll go to that.
Oh, I would definitely. It's been 10 years since I've seen them. I would love to go see a Stryper show with you.
Yeah, I would do that in a heartbeat. I've never seen. I went through a big 80s metal phase in high school, and I never got to see any of these bands live, but I'd love to see Stryper. I think that would be super fun.
I will send you my thesis, and you can read that. And
I really want to read this thesis.
I tried actually to interview them for that.
Yeah.
And they never responded to me, and I thought to myself that like I should have just like brought it to the show and just like thrown it on stage.
Uh-huh.
And I did not do that. I don't know. Maybe I had too much of a sense of shame. Maybe I will now. If it's still any good. I haven't looked at it in forever. I don't know if it's any good.
Yeah. Well, please send that to me because I'm very curious.
Will do.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
When I started doing this podcast. I never thought I would have the opportunity to discuss Stryper at length, and now I've done that. So thank you, Chris, and I appreciate all of you being here. That was great. This was a real fun episode, so I was glad I got to sit down with Chris. That's the show for the week. Thank you for listening. You can, of course, subscribe to Between Awesome and Disaster on iTunes. You can give us a rating or a comment. It would be greatly appreciated. And if you enjoyed the show, feel free to tell a friend. I'm growing this organically, and being able to reach people, including the people in several foreign countries like Australia and France that I've gotten downloads in. Thank you for being here. And if you listen to my show and you're not in the United States of America, I'd love to hear from you. So feel free to send me a tweet at @ComicWillCarey. That's Carey, Carey. And you can, of course, check my website for my upcoming stand-up dates. And if you want me to come do my one-man show in your area, feel free to send me a message, and I'll try to figure that out. Thank you, guys, and I will see you next week between Awesome and Disaster. Take care, everyone.